Dux, Rheem and Rinnai recently formed an association called the Australian Water Heating Manufacturers. We did this because government policies are pouring cold water on Australia's hot water industry. Dux has been making water heaters in Australia for 110 years. Unless a level playing field is urgently created, it has the potential to send local manufacturing of water heaters the way of the car industry. Dux Hot Water has been making water heaters in Australia since 1915. We're 110 years old this year, which is an incredible milestone for any company, let alone a regional manufacturer. We've made millions of water heaters over that time. There are very few appliances that are still made in Australia. At Dux, we're passionate about making quality water heaters in Australia. That's why it's time for Dux to make a stand so that we're here for another 110 years. Dux has never taken a cent from Australian taxpayers, and we're not asking for one now. We employ Australians and we pay our taxes right here in Australia. We've already spent tens of millions of dollars to invest in making water heaters locally in Australia. We walk our talk too. Wherever we can, we support other Australian manufacturers, even if it costs us a little bit more to do so. We're really one big family here, literally. 1 in 3 of our workers is related to somebody else on site. Our workers are our greatest talent scouts. In one instance, we have every single member of one family here on site. I've been in hot water at Dux for 21 years. There are lots of people at Dux with much longer service than me. In fact, I'm probably at the midpoint in terms of service. Plenty of our employees here have only ever worked at Dux. Multiple research studies conducted over the last 20 years show consistent findings. Water heaters aren't just low interest products, they're no interest products. My wife often tells me before we catch up with our friends, nobody's interested in your hot water systems. Unfortunately, she's right. The research says the same. Most people can't tell you their type of water heater, let alone the brand. Some people can't even tell you where their water heater is located. Knowledge of water heaters is very low. Once every 15 years or so, a customer typically turns on their hot tap in the shower to discover cold water. The wife tells the husband to call someone, and the husband asks the wife to call someone. Eventually, one of them typically calls a plumber, hoping that the water heater can be repaired. Where it can't be economically repaired, the plumber advises the best water heater for that application. The plumber considers things like the plumbing regulations, the size of the household, upfront costs, running costs, to decide on the best hot water system for them. Plumbers are the experts, and they've been sidelined over the last 5 years, replaced by door knockers and overseas call centres with high pressure sales tactics. Those people may not be interested in the best water heater for an Australian home. Simply, they want to get rid of the water heater that they've got on the back of their truck out the front. There are a number of very important points, and they all relate to imported heat pump water heaters. Heat pump water heaters extract heat energy from the air to heat water. They're great products in any renewable energy transition, right up there with other great green products like electric cars, solar panels, and batteries. In 2019, Australians installed around 20,000 heat pump water heaters. That's now grown 6-fold, which is a great thing. Dux believes that quality heat pumps can be a great choice for Australian homes. But the word quality is key. There is no minimum performance standard for heat pumps in Australia. Incredibly, despite having no minimum performance standard, these water heaters are attracting federal, New South Wales and Victorian subsidies paid for by electricity users. These are not government rebates. Actually, far from it. You're paying environmental levies on your electricity prices to fund all of this. Having no performance standard has allowed heat pumps to be sold that may not be suitable for Australian conditions. Guess what's happened? Low quality heat pumps have flooded the market. Over 400,000 heat pumps have been sold in Australia in the last 5 years, but less than 10% were made in Australia. Now that's a disgrace when Australian manufacturers like Dux have invested millions of their own money to make these green products right here in Australia. In fact, last year we sent highly skilled heat pump workers home, whilst low quality units flooded into the market. Now Dux isn't saying all imported heat pumps are bad, far from it. In fact, there are some very good ones, brands like Reclaim, Stiebel and Therman from Japan and Germany. Most of the heat pumps are coming from China. Dux buys a premium Chinese heat pump for use in some applications itself. Let me be clear, and I stood in front of our factory workers and said these exact words. I love China. I love the Chinese people. I love Chinese food. When it comes to manufacturing, China has some huge competitive advantage, like enormous scale, cheap labour, cheap energy. They've also got a long-term strategy for manufacturing and strong leadership. A decade ago, President Xi launched the Made in China 2025 campaign. If you've never heard of it, Google it. The strategy called for direct subsidies, cheap credit, and inexpensive land for 10 selected industries. It included renewable energy products like electric vehicles, solar panels, batteries, and many others. It was a brilliant strategy. Basically, all of the products that would be in demand around the world 10 years later. Their target was to sell 3 million electric vehicles annually by 2025. Last year, China made and sold over 10 million. Whereas in 2015, they produced 65% of the world's solar panels and 47% of the batteries, today they're responsible for 90% and 70% respectively. If you're writing a report card on the Made in China strategy from 2025, you're giving it an A+. Why don't we have that sort of manufacturing vision in Australia? Maybe that's a lesson we need to learn. Labour's the big one. Now, our guys here work their backside off to earn every single cent, so it's a cost that's baked onto us. Australia is a very high cost labour market. In comparison to China, we pay 6 times as much for labour and over 12 times more than Vietnam. But let's start with electricity. When I went to university over 30 years ago now, the lecturer talked about Australia's electricity network. He said that Australia had this worldwide competitive advantage in electricity because we have the best coal. The coal mines are located right next to the power stations, and our population is located in major cities along the coast, so we can minimise the distribution costs. I remember thinking, that's so amazing for Australia. So now, turn the clock forward 30 years. The International Energy Agency has a real-time electricity price tracker. How do you think we're going? Data for just last month shows that Australians now pay double the price for electricity than Russians, even when they're at war. We pay 67% more than Iran, and they're subjected to international sanctions. Now, we're not the dearest in the world by any means, but how did this go so wrong? At Dux, our electricity bill went up 65% last year. We've put nearly $1 million worth of solar panels on our roof, so much so you can't even see the roof in some sections. You've got governments trying to appeal to voters with ambitious renewable energy targets. Now, I'm a big fan of ambitious goals, especially for renewable energy, but governments may have to realise they have no control over any of the moving parts. Just days ago, an International Energy Agency report called out the unprecedented growth in worldwide demand for electricity. It's like adding the equivalent of Japan to the world's electricity consumption each year. It forecast global electricity consumption will increase around 4% annually, driven by industry, air conditioning, electric cars, electrification, and data centres. I think it's likely to be even stronger in Australia, especially in Victoria, where the government has proposed banning the replacement of gas appliances in homes other than gas cooktops. So you have a demand surge on one hand and extreme supply risk on the other. Australia is still very reliant on coal-fired electricity. More than half of New South Wales and Victoria's electricity is still from coal. Electricity producers and their stakeholders are motivated to close coal-fired power stations and justifiably reluctant to invest capital into their maintenance. Chris Bowen just came out the other day and said that an electric power station has gone down nearly every day. Well, of course, if the asset is being shut down, maintenance becomes a band-aid. You've now got this ridiculous situation where governments are being forced to step in to fund the continued operation and maintenance of power stations just to keep the lights on, and at a cost of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money. This isn't far-fetched. It's happening right now at the Eraring Power Station in New South Wales and the Loy Yang Power Station in Victoria. Next, you have the renewable energy zones that have been built in the western regions of New South Wales and Victoria. To connect these renewable zones to the grid, you need 10,000 kilometres of new transmission lines. Years ago, Origin Energy's CEO, Frank Calabria, called this Herculean and needing a war-like focus. Very little progress has been made because landowners don't want the transmission lines on their land. It gets worse. Since 2019, the price for electricity cables has nearly doubled and transformers have gone up by around 75%. Then you've got Snowy 2.0, an amazing project, the Big Battery. It was supposed to cost $2 billion and be ready in 2021. Now it's going to cost at least 6 times that at $12 billion, and they're hopeful that it'll be open in 2028. Australia used to be a world leader in gas. I remember the Japanese telling me a decade ago how lucky we are in Australia to have all of these natural resources, which they don't have. Australia used to be a world-leading exporter of natural gas. Now we're talking about importing it. How did this go so wrong? At Dux, we need gas on this site because we operate a furnace at over 800 degrees. Only gas can get us to those temperatures. Our energy broker described our gas prices as crippling. In 2023, our gas price was over $31 a gigajoule, nearly triple the $12 cap recommended by the government in late 2022. So we purchased a state-of-the-art gas furnace from Victoria to save money and reduce emissions. We had guys coming in early. We were literally doing everything we could possibly do to reduce our gas usage because those high costs were killing us. We reduced our gas usage on site by around 30%, which is a great thing for us and a great thing for the environment. But then we got a bill at the end of the year from the gas company for over $100,000 because we didn't use enough gas. In fairness to them, there was a take or pay clause in our contract that we had completely missed because we were racing to save gas. We've said to the government repeatedly that we're concerned that consumers are going to be left stranded by warranties from imported heat pumps. Where a homeowner has purchased a heat pump from a seller and that seller is no longer trading, and where the actual overseas manufacturer is unknown, then the Australian consumer will have real difficulty in enforcing their warranty rights under Australian consumer law. Dux is very concerned that this could impact the reputation of heat pumps and turn customers away from the technology, which would be a tragedy. In contrast, Australian manufacturers have audited warranty provisions set aside to protect consumers. Consumers are further protected under Australian consumer law should any of these manufacturers fail. In that instance, the last seller assumes the warranty liability. We're talking about major companies like ASX-listed Reece and Bunnings through Wesfarmers, who would ultimately be there to protect the consumer. Some of these other heat pump importers were established days before rebates started. Consumers need protection from warranties that may have little or no financial resources behind them. Dux has made the recommendation to various state and federal governments how this scheme can be improved. There are a number of government subsidy schemes which incentivise the uptake of green products, including energy efficient water heaters like heat pumps and solar thermal water heaters. In New South Wales and Victoria, these schemes are called the Energy Savings Scheme and the Victorian Energy Upgrades respectively. These state rebates are then stacked with a federal government rebate called the Small Scale Renewable Energy Scheme. Importantly, these schemes and subsidies are not government rebates. They're funded by electricity users in the form of environmental charges resulting in higher electricity prices. At Dux, the environmental levy is called out on our energy bill and it's around 20%. We're talking well over $100,000 per year. At home, I pay this levy too. It's around 10%. With cost of living pressures top of mind for many households, it's critically important that the cost burden from a scheme like this is safeguarded for the best use of those funds. Industry supports the recommendations made by an independent climate think tank called Beyond Zero Emissions. That's Sarah from out on our heat pump line on the front cover. They estimate the driving demand and local supply of heat pumps could create thousands of jobs and generate $2 billion in revenue per year by 2030. They make two recommendations to protect local industries, jobs, and consumers. 1. Urgently introduce a mandatory minimum performance standard for all heat pumps sold in Australia that are eligible for rebates. 2. Provide incentives linked to content, like 100% rebates for Australian-made and Australian assembly, 75% for an Australian-made tank, or 50% for rebates for fully imported units. This would encourage an investment in Australian manufacturing and Australian jobs. We can't let this become another Pink Bats Mark II. We're calling on the federal, New South Wales and Victorian governments to urgently adopt the plan recommended by Beyond Zero Emissions. It'll protect Australian jobs and consumers and stop cold water being poured on Australia's hot water industry before it's too late.